Hey everyone, before we get into the video, I'm curious. What country are you watching from? Drop it down in the comments. I'd love to see where you're all from.
The wind howled like an animal trapped between the mountains. The snow had been falling for hours, heavy and silent, erasing the world beneath it until even the trees seemed to vanish. Somewhere within that white void, a woman stumbled through knee-deep drifts, breath sharp and ragged against the endless cold. Evelyn had been following the frozen stream since dawn, her boots soaked, her shawl stiff with frost. She'd long lost the trail, the line her guide swore would lead to the settlement. But now all that existed was white. White and wind. Her gloved fingers clutched her satchel tighter, as though the few coins and trinkets inside might anchor her to something real. When her foot slipped on a buried root, she went down hard. The air rushed out of her, her palms hitting snow that bit like glass. She cursed under her breath, half a prayer and half despair, and stayed there a moment, shivering. The silence pressed in until even her heartbeat sounded too loud. Then, movement. A shadow cut through the falling snow, silent and tall, barely distinguishable from the storm itself. At first she thought she imagined it, a trick of exhaustion. But when the figure stopped several paces away, she saw him clearly enough to know she was not alone. He stood unmoving, his posture neither threatening nor friendly. Snow gathered on his shoulders, his bow slung across his back. His dark hair was bound behind his head, and the wind carried the faint rustle of beads and hide. His gaze, steady and sharp, fell upon her like weight. She didn't know whether to speak or run. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She had heard stories, whispered warnings of Apache territory, of those who did not take kindly to intruders, but none had prepared her for this silence between them. This thin line drawn by the storm itself. Nakai studied her for a long time without moving. He could see the tremor in her hands, the unsteady rise and fall of her breath. Her clothes were wrong for this land. Her eyes held fear, but also a defiance that did not belong to someone ready to die. He had seen soldiers and traders wander too far before. They rarely survived the cold. This one, though, she didn't carry a weapon. Only desperation. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, unhurried, like the calm before thunder. "You are far from where you belong." His English was rough but clear. Evelyn blinked, half from surprise, half from relief that he hadn't drawn his bow. My guide left. He said we were close to a town." Her words tumbled out, shaky. "I just need to find the road again." Nakai's eyes flicked toward the tree line. "There is no road here." Her stomach turned cold in a way the snow never could. "Then where am I?" "Too deep," he said simply, and turned away, as though that were the end of it. He started walking toward the ridge, his figure fading into the white curtain of snow. Evelyn hesitated. Pride told her not to follow, but fear crushed pride quickly. "Wait!" she called, stumbling forward. "Please, if I stay here, I'll freeze." Nakai stopped. The faintest sigh escaped him. He didn't look back, but his shoulders stiffened. He hadn't intended to help her. She was not his problem, but he could not leave a living being to die so close to his land. It would bring restless spirits, and he had enough of those already. Without a word, he gestured for her to follow. She hesitated, then trudged after him, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the snow. Every few paces she looked up, trying to see his face, but he never looked back. His stride was long, certain, as though he knew the land by the sound of the wind alone. By dusk, they reached the shelter of a rocky overhang. Nakai cleared the snow from the ground and lit a small fire, its glow painting the stone in soft orange. Evelyn sat at a distance, rubbing her frozen hands, unsure if she was more afraid of him or of being alone again. He tossed a piece of dried meat toward her. She caught it clumsily. "Eat," he said. She hesitated, then nodded, muttering a quiet thank you. The fire crackled, filling the silence with a rhythm both uneasy and strangely calm. Neither spoke again that night. The storm howled outside, but within the narrow cave, a fragile truce took shape, a warmth that neither trusted, yet neither turned away from. And in the flicker of flamelight, Nakai's shadow stretched long across the rock, crossing hers for the briefest moment before pulling apart again. The snow would bury their footprints by morning. But the meeting had already left a mark no wind could erase. The storm had quieted by morning, leaving behind a landscape so still it seemed carved from glass. Snow hung heavy on the pines, and a low mist curled along the valley floor. The world was colorless except for the dull amber of the fire that still burned between them. Evelyn woke first, her body aching from the cold ground. The fire had burned low, a soft halo of smoke winding upward. She turned her head and saw Nakai sitting just beyond it, sharpening a knife against a flat stone. His movements were unhurried, deliberate. He hadn't slept. She could tell by the stillness in his shoulders. He glanced up once, long enough for their eyes to meet. Then back to the blade. "You move too loud," he said quietly. Evelyn frowned, her voice raspy. "I didn't realize I needed to be quiet." "In this land, everything listens," he said, sheathing the knife. "If you don't listen back, you don't live long." There was no threat in his tone, but the words settled heavy. He stood, pulling on a fur-lined cloak, and stepped into the light outside the cave. She followed him, cautious, her breath rising like smoke. The air was sharp enough to sting her lungs. The valley stretched below them, untouched, endless, cruelly beautiful. Evelyn stared, half in awe, half in dread. How far to the nearest town? He didn't turn. 3 days if the snow holds. 5 if it does not, she swallowed hard. Then I can't make it alone. Nakai said nothing. He was watching the horizon, where the clouds thickened like bruises. His land had a rhythm, and the rhythm was changing. He didn't like it. But when he looked at the woman beside him, trembling but trying to hide it, he knew the spirits had thrown her in his path for a reason. "I will take you," he said finally, "to the edge of my people's land. After that, you find your own way." It wasn't kindness, not entirely. But it was something. Evelyn nodded, too exhausted to argue. "Thank you," she whispered. They packed in silence. She helped gather firewood and brush, though her hands were clumsy with cold. Nakai watched her, not with pity but quiet study. Every movement she made was foreign to him. Her clothes, her scent, even the way she looked at the world as if it should yield to her will. He didn't understand it, but he didn't despise it either. Not yet. When they set off, the world was blanketed and quiet. Evelyn tried to keep up, stepping where he stepped, though the snow rose nearly to her knees. After a while, her breath came in short bursts. Nakai noticed without turning. "You slow down the more you talk," he said. "I haven't said a word. You talk in your head. I can hear it." She almost laughed, but stopped herself. There was no smile on his face to match. Hours passed like that. Footsteps, silence, wind. By midday, they reached a river half frozen under a crust of ice. Nakai knelt, breaking the surface with a small branch. He cupped the water in his hands, drinking slowly before glancing back at her. "Drink here, only here. The snow carries sickness lower down." Evelyn crouched, careful to do as he did. The water was so cold it burned her throat, but it was clean, and for a moment she felt life return to her limbs. When she straightened, Nakai was watching her again, not harshly, but as though memorizing. She looked away quickly, brushing the snow from her shawl. "What?" "You don't belong here," he said, voice low. "I know that." He studied her for another moment, then turned and kept walking. By nightfall, the snow began again, soft, relentless. They stopped beneath a stand of spruce trees, their branches thick enough to shield from the worst of it. Nakai built another fire, smaller this time, its glow barely reaching his face. Evelyn sat across from him, hands extended toward the warmth. "I never asked your name," she said softly. "You didn't need it." "Well, I do now, unless you want me to keep calling you mysterious stranger who saved me." He gave her a long look, unreadable. "Nakai," she smiled faintly. "Nakai." The sound of it felt heavy on her tongue, ancient and unfamiliar. "I'm Evelyn. I know," she blinked. "How?" "You wear your name like a bell, loud." Her smile faded. "Is that an insult?" "Only if you think being seen is dangerous." For a while, neither spoke. The fire cracked and the snow whispered against the trees. When the wind shifted, She saw his eyes catch the light, dark, alert, and distant, as though he lived in a world she could never step into. He sat cross-legged, hands steady over the flame. His calm unsettled her. She wanted to ask what he was thinking, why he'd helped her. What kind of man chose to live alone in the cold? But something about him made questions feel too small. Instead, she said quietly, "Do you always travel alone?" His jaw tightened. There is no one left to travel with. The words hung between them, bare and unguarded. Evelyn felt the sting of them but didn't press. She only nodded, pulling her shawl closer. Later that night, she dreamed of footsteps crunching in the snow. Her own, then someone else's, then silence. When she woke, the fire was dim, and Nakai was standing near the edge of the camp, watching the forest. "Something wrong?" she whispered. He didn't answer for a moment. Then, "The woods are listening again." She sat up, fear prickling at the back of her neck. But when she looked around, there was nothing, only snow and trees, the kind that kept their secrets. Nakai's voice was calm but final. "Go back to sleep. Tomorrow we move faster." And with that, he returned to his place near the fire. His shadow stretched across the ground again, meeting hers in the glow, touching, then parting, just as before. They would walk closer tomorrow. But neither of them knew yet how close the snow would bring them. The third day brought no mercy from the winter. Snowflakes drifted from a colorless sky, falling slow and steady, blanketing every sound. The only thing that broke the silence was the soft crunch of their footsteps and the faint whisper of the wind. Evelyn's breath came out in small clouds. Her lips cracked, her fingers numb even beneath the gloves. Nakai walked a few paces ahead, moving with the kind of grace that came from living in rhythm with the earth itself. Every step he took seemed deliberate, as though even the ground knew better than to resist him. "Are you sure we're not walking in circles?" she asked finally, exhaustion edging her voice. "Yes," she frowned. "You didn't even look." He didn't stop walking. "I don't need to." The answer annoyed her more than she wanted to admit. He had been quiet the entire morning, and while she appreciated his strength, his silence felt like another kind of cold. "You could at least pretend to talk. It helps pass the time. I listen instead. To what?" "To everything you don't." That shut her up. For a while. By midday, the path narrowed through a thicket of pines. The snow here was untouched, heavy on the branches, bending them low. It was beautiful in a haunting way, like walking through a dream where the world had forgotten sound. Evelyn tripped once, then again, and caught herself each time before she could fall. Nakai didn't look back, but she saw the faintest turn of his head, a glance so subtle she almost missed it. When they reached a small clearing, he finally stopped. The trees opened to reveal a shallow ravine below, a strip of ice reflecting the dull gray sky. He crouched near the edge, studying tracks in the snow. Evelyn knelt beside him carefully. "What is it?" He brushed snow away with his glove. "Not us. 2 days old. What kind of animal?" "Men." Her stomach sank. "Men?" He nodded once, pointing toward the broken branches. "Riders, probably settlers. Or worse. Worse than settlers," she whispered. "Hunters." She didn't need him to explain further. The word alone carried weight. He rose smoothly, eyes scanning the horizon. His expression didn't change, but his shoulders had tightened, his entire body sharper, more alert. Evelyn's pulse quickened. "What do we do?" "We stay quiet. Move fast." He adjusted the strap of his quiver and started down the ravine. Evelyn followed, trying not to make noise, but the snow betrayed her. Every step crunched like a warning. She could feel the air grow thicker, heavier. Hours passed with no sight of anyone, yet the feeling of being watched refused to fade. Nakai's every glance, every pause, told her he felt it too. By dusk, the light began to die. They found shelter in a hollow between 2 fallen trees. Nakai cleared the snow again and lit a small, nearly invisible fire. Evelyn crouched nearby, hands trembling slightly as she tried to warm them. She noticed his bow lying beside him, strung and ready. "Do you think they'll find us?" she asked. "If they're still close," he said quietly. "They already have." She stared into the fire, heart pounding. And if they do, then you don't speak. Don't move, no matter what happens. His tone was calm, but there was something in his eyes, something cold and dangerous. Evelyn nodded, afraid to ask more. The wind shifted suddenly, and Nakai's head turned toward the darkness beyond the firelight. He moved silently, rising to his feet, bow in hand. Evelyn followed his gaze but saw only trees and drifting snow. "Nakai," she whispered. He raised a hand for silence. The woods breathed around them, heavy with unseen life. Then, faintly, a branch cracked somewhere to the left. Evelyn froze. The fire flickered, casting wild shadows across his face. Another sound. Closer. Nakai drew an arrow without a word. His posture was steady, his expression carved from stone. Evelyn held her breath, every nerve alive. The forest waited. Then, as suddenly as it came, the noise stopped. Only the wind remained. He stayed ready for a long time before finally lowering the bow. "They passed," he murmured. "Too far to smell smoke." Evelyn exhaled shakily, realizing only now how hard she'd been gripping her shawl. "You're sure?" His gaze met hers through the dim light. "If I weren't, you would already know." The way he said it made her pulse skip. She looked down quickly, pretending to feed the fire. For a while they sat in silence, the tension easing but not vanishing. The storm outside began again, soft flakes dancing in the faint glow. Evelyn's mind wandered to what kind of life he must have lived to move with such quiet confidence, to sleep with danger and not flinch. "Were you always alone?" she asked suddenly. Nakai didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the fire. "Not always. What happened?" He turned his head slightly. The faint light carved his features into sharp planes. "White soldiers happened." Her throat went dry. "I'm sorry. Why?" His tone wasn't cruel, but it cut. "You didn't hold the gun." You still wear their world," he interrupted softly. "Even your sorry sounds like them." Evelyn swallowed hard, her voice small. "And what about you? You sound like someone who's forgotten what forgiveness is." His eyes flicked to her then, dark and unblinking. For a long moment, neither looked away. The fire crackled between them, throwing sparks into the cold air. "Forgiveness," Nakai said finally, "is a word for people who have something left to lose." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. When the fire dimmed, he rose silently and moved to the edge of the clearing, watching the storm roll over the trees. Evelyn lay down near the fading warmth, the echo of his words still heavy in her chest. Outside, the snow fell thicker, heavier, burying everything it touched. And for the first time since meeting him, she wondered which of them the land would swallow first. By the fourth day, the world had turned against them. The snow thickened, the wind cut harder, and even Nakai's steady rhythm began to falter beneath the cold's relentless bite. Evelyn followed behind him, her feet heavy and wet, her vision blurring in the white. She had stopped feeling her fingers hours ago. When she stumbled for the fifth time, she didn't get up immediately. The snow was soft, almost comforting, and her body screamed to rest. "Evelyn." His voice was sharp, cutting through the howl of the wind. She forced her eyes open. Nakai stood above her, shadowed against the pale sky, his expression unreadable. "I can't," she whispered, her lips cracked and trembling. "I just can't." He crouched beside her, gripping her arm, his hand rough and warm even through her sleeve. "You can," he said flatly, "or you die here." "I'm not you. I know." He looked her over once, then reached into his satchel and pulled out a strip of dried meat, pressing it into her hand. "Eat!" She blinked at it, barely able to move. "I'm not hungry. You are. You just don't feel it." He stood again, scanning the sky. "We move before the storm gets worse." Evelyn wanted to yell at him, call him heartless, cold, anything. But all that came out was a shiver. She forced herself up, legs shaking. Nakai didn't offer a hand this time. He simply started walking again, expecting her to follow. And she did. They walked for hours through the white silence until the trees thinned and the sound of rushing water broke through the wind. Evelyn looked up in surprise. A river wound through the snow like a black vein, half frozen, the current strong beneath the ice. "We cross here," Nakai said. Evelyn stared at him like he'd gone mad. "We'll fall through." "Not if you walk where I walk." He stepped onto the ice, testing it with the end of his bow. It creaked but held. Evelyn hesitated, her breath shaking. "Nakai, this is suicide." He turned his head just enough to meet her eyes. So is staying. Reluctantly, she followed. The first step was the hardest. The sound of the ice groaning beneath her feet made her entire body tense. Nakai moved ahead, silent and balanced, his weight spread evenly. Halfway across, the wind picked up, shrieking through the trees. Evelyn wrapped her shawl tighter, her vision blurring with snow. Then came the sound, the sharp, splitting crack of ice breaking. She gasped, looking down. The ground beneath her feet shuddered. Nakai turned instantly. "Don't move!" But the crack spread faster than he could reach her. The ice gave way, and the world vanished in a rush of freezing black water. Evelyn's scream tore through the air. The current pulled her under, biting and merciless. She fought, gasping, kicking, her hands clawing at nothing. Then, strong fingers seized her wrist. "Nakai!" He leaned down, bracing his weight, pulling her up inch by inch. Her shawl snagged, ripping, but he didn't stop. "Hold on!" He barked. I can't!" He let out a short, angry breath. "Then I'll hold for both of us." With one last heave, he dragged her onto the ice, collapsing beside her. They both lay there, panting, the wind howling around them. Evelyn coughed, water spilling from her lips, her body trembling violently. "Move!" Nakai ordered. "You have to move or you'll freeze." She didn't. Couldn't. Her lips were blue, her eyes glassy. Without thinking, he pulled off his fur cloak and wrapped it around her. She tried to protest weakly, but he silenced her with a look. "Don't speak." He half carried, half dragged her to the riverbank and into the shadow of a thick pine grove. There he knelt and worked quickly, building a fire with his remaining dry tinder, his hand steady despite the cold biting at his skin. When the fire caught, he turned to her, still shivering uncontrollably. He hesitated only a moment before pulling her closer to the heat. "Stay near the flames," he said. I can't feel my hands." Nakai reached for them, holding her palms between his, rubbing them briskly. Her skin was icy. He brought her hands closer to the fire, then pressed them to his chest. She flinched from the sudden warmth, but he didn't let go. "Keep them there," he said softly. Her heart pounded. The closeness was startling. His heartbeat was strong beneath her palms, steady against her trembling. He smelled of wood smoke and snow and something wilder. Why are you helping me?" she whispered. His eyes flicked to hers. "Because the spirits would not forgive me if I let you die for being foolish." Evelyn almost smiled, despite the cold. "That sounds almost like concern." He looked away. "Don't mistake survival for kindness." But she saw it, the faint shift in his tone, the smallest crack in his armor. Something human and unguarded. They sat in silence, the firelight flickering between them. Her breathing slowed. His hand still held hers. Outside, the wind raged. Inside their little circle of light, the world had narrowed to warmth, breath, and heartbeat. For the first time since she'd met him, Evelyn didn't feel afraid, she only felt alive. The storm had not relented for 2 days. Snow beat against the cabin roof like a drum, steady and merciless, and the wind's howl crawled through every crack in the walls. Evelyn sat close to the fire, wrapping her shawl tighter, watching the flames lick at the half-burned logs. Every so often the wood popped, echoing in the small room like distant gunfire. Nakai moved silently, as he always did. His steps made no sound against the packed dirt floor. He was carving something, a small handle of bone, smooth from his hands. Every stroke of his knife was deliberate, measured, rhythmic. He didn't look up, but she could feel when his attention shifted. There was a kind of awareness about him, the sort that made the air heavier. She cleared her throat, more to break the silence than to say anything. "You don't speak much," she said softly. He didn't answer immediately. He finished shaving another sliver from the bone before setting it down, Words don't stop storms, he replied. Evelyn tilted her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. And silence does? He looked up, meeting her gaze for a brief moment, his eyes unreadable. Silence keeps the fire steady, he said, and returned to carving. For a while she said nothing. The rhythm of the knife and the crackle of the fire blended into a strange kind of music. Her mind wandered to the world she had left behind, the village, the cold politeness of her husband's family, the hollow comfort of walls filled with voices that never really spoke. Here the world was raw, biting, but it was real. Every sound, every breath of wind outside, reminded her she was alive. When she looked at Nakai again, he was staring into the fire, his face caught in the shifting light. There was something almost sorrowful in the stillness of his posture, like someone used to being alone. "Do you ever miss them?" she asked suddenly. He looked at her again. "Who?" "Your people." The fire popped sharply between them. He didn't answer for a long time. "They do not miss what they have lost," he said finally, voice low. That answer stayed with her long after he turned away. She wanted to ask what he meant, but the words died in her throat. There was something fragile about this moment, like walking across thin ice, and she feared that pressing further would make it crack. Instead, she said quietly, "You carved that from bone?" He nodded. "Deer, the handle for an arrow knife." She reached toward it. "Can I see?" He hesitated, not out of mistrust, but out of instinct. Then he passed it to her carefully, the warmth of his hand brushing hers for the first time since he had caught her on that slope days ago. The contact was fleeting, but she felt it long after. The bone handle was smooth, polished, with faint markings carved along the sides. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It's not finished," he replied. Neither of them spoke after that. The storm outside grew harsher, howling like a living thing. Evelyn sat with the carved piece in her hands, tracing the patterns with her fingers. Her heart felt heavy, not from sadness, but from something she didn't yet understand. When she finally returned the piece, her hand brushed his again. This time, he didn't pull away. The next morning, the snow had calmed. The world outside was white and endless, the air so still it almost hurt to breathe. Nakai stepped out first, scanning the tree line with practiced eyes. The storm had buried most of their supplies under drifts, but the sun had returned, pale and cold. Evelyn followed, her shawl drawn close. Her boots sank deep into the snow, and each step was a struggle, but she didn't complain. She was learning to move the way he did, quiet, deliberate, efficient. When they reached the tree line, Nakai stopped suddenly and lifted his hand. Evelyn froze behind him. There, faint tracks, too light for a deer, too large for a fox. "Men," he said under his breath. 2, maybe 3. Her heart jumped. "From your tribe?" He shook his head. "Not mine." The wind picked up again, brushing snow off the branches. His tone was calm, but his stance shifted, his hand near the bow at his back. He turned to her. "We go back. But now," he said sharply. There was no room for argument. They returned to the cabin in silence, her breath quick and shallow. The warmth that had been building between them seemed to vanish, replaced by the cold weight of fear. When they reached the cabin, Nakai closed the door behind them and began gathering things quickly. His bow, arrows, a pouch of dried meat. Evelyn stood near the fire, her voice trembling slightly. "Are they dangerous?" "They follow trails," he said. "And yours is easy to follow," she swallowed. "Mine? You walk like someone who's never had to hide." He looked at her then, not coldly, not cruelly, but with the clarity of someone who saw the world differently. For the first time, she realized he wasn't just quiet, he was guarded. Every word, every glance was chosen carefully, as if survival depended on it. "Will they find us?" she asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached for his knife and handed it to her. "If they do, use this. Don't hesitate." Evelyn stared at the blade, her reflection faint in the steel. "I don't know how." "Then learn fast." He moved toward the window, peering out into the white. For a long time there was only silence between them. Not comfort this time, but tension. The storm had passed, but something darker was now gathering. Evelyn stood behind him, clutching the knife. She should have been terrified, but all she could think about was how his voice had changed, low, commanding, alive. And somewhere beneath that fear was the strange realization that she trusted him more than anyone she'd ever known. The morning arrived cold and sharp, slicing through the cabin with light like a blade. Snow clung to every branch outside, turning the forest into a vast, silent expanse of white. Evelyn woke to the smell of smoke and pine, the soft hiss of melting snow dripping from the eaves. Nakai was already awake, crouched near the small fire, checking the bowstrings of several arrows. The deer-hide quiver rested against his back. His long hair, partially shaved at the sides, fell in a loose braid down his shoulder. The quiet in the room was thick, almost tangible. Evelyn hesitated, watching him from the edge of the firelight. "Are we safe?" she asked finally, her voice small. He didn't look up. "Safe is a word for people who can afford it." Her lips pressed together. That wasn't an answer, but she could feel the truth in it. The day passed with silence stretching between them, broken only by the occasional snap of wood or distant caw of a crow. Evelyn moved cautiously around the cabin, her fingers brushing the wooden surfaces, her shawl wrapped tightly. Nakai watched her at intervals, his posture relaxed but alert, a constant tension in the set of his shoulders. At midday, he finally spoke. "We need to move before the snow hardens the tracks completely." "They will follow," she nodded. Her stomach churned with unease. She had spent 2 days feeling entirely dependent on him, relying on his instincts, his strength, his decisions. And now, she realized she didn't know if she could survive without that reliance. They stepped outside, and the cold slammed into her immediately. Her boots sank into the snow, and she drew her shawl closer. But Nakai moved like he belonged to the world, untouched by it. They reached the edge of the clearing when Nakai stopped. Evelyn froze beside him. Faint tracks were pressed into the snow. Prints too large for animals, too deliberate to be anything else. "They are close," Nakai said, voice low. "We have little time." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "What do we do?" "Move fast, stay low, don't speak." She followed him instinctively, matching his silent rhythm, the snow muffling their passage. They moved like shadows, past trees and rocks, until a ridge provided cover. From there, Nakai surveyed the frozen landscape. His gaze lingered on something distant, something beyond her perception. Evelyn held her breath. He exhaled slowly and turned his attention toward her. "Why do you follow me?" she asked suddenly, unable to contain herself. He didn't flinch. "You're unprepared. You make noise. You need guidance." She wanted to argue, to say that she wasn't a child, that she could handle herself. But something in the calm certainty of his tone made her pause. He didn't offer help as a favor. He offered it as necessity, and she knew, deep down, that she needed it. The ridge narrowed into a thin path leading down to a creek partially frozen over. Nakai moved first, testing the footing with the tip of his boot. Evelyn followed carefully, her fingers brushing against rocks and branches for balance. Each step demanded focus, and she felt her body remembering a kind of fear she had almost forgotten in the cabin warmth. Halfway down, she slipped. The shawl tangled around her arms, and she fell toward the creek. Before she could hit the ice, Nakai's hand caught her wrist. "Strong, steady, unyielding, again?" he asked, though the faintest hint of amusement touched his voice. She stammered, embarrassed, but he didn't release her. His eyes, steady and unflinching, held hers for a moment longer than necessary. The forest seemed to hold its breath. "Hold on tight," he said simply. Together they crossed the narrow creek, the snow crunching beneath their boots, the cold biting through her shawl. On the other side, Nakai released her hand without ceremony, but she didn't step back. For the first time, she realized she trusted him entirely. Not because she wanted to, but because survival depended on it. When they reached a small rise overlooking a frozen valley, Nakai paused. Evelyn followed, catching her breath. He looked toward the horizon, scanning the snowy expanse. Then, for the first time, he turned fully to her. "You stay behind if I say," he said quietly. "Do you understand?" "Yes," she whispered. The silence stretched again. Then he added, almost under his breath, "And don't mistake this for trust." She wanted to protest, to tell him that she already did, but words felt foolish in the cold air. Instead, she nodded, understanding that trust, in his world, was a fragile thing, earned, not given. The wind picked up, carrying snowflakes into their faces. Evelyn tightened her shawl, leaning slightly into the gust. Nakai adjusted the quiver on his back, moving forward with precise steps. She followed, careful to match his pace. The valley below them was silent, untouched by human hand for miles, save for the faint prints that led to the tree line where danger lingered. Evelyn realized then that their survival depended not only on his skill, but on a shared rhythm, a silent understanding she had begun to recognize but had yet to name. As they continued down the ridge, she felt a subtle shift between them, a tether, invisible yet undeniable. He still did not speak much, still did not show softness, but his presence alone had begun to anchor her. And though neither of them would admit it, the space between fear and trust had begun to narrow, like snow melting under the first faint touch of sunlight. The storm had finally passed. Sunlight fractured through the clouds, glinting off the thick snow that blanketed the world. The forest seemed almost peaceful now. The earlier menace softened under layers of frost and silence. Nakai moved ahead, silent and precise as ever, testing the terrain. Evelyn followed, her shawl wrapped tightly, satchel at her side, muscles sore from days of travel through deep snow. Despite her exhaustion, she noticed the subtle way he shifted over uneven ground. His awareness of every step, every branch, every hidden hazard. She had begun to recognize it, to almost anticipate it herself, though she would never admit it aloud. They came upon a clearing, the snow disturbed in a pattern that suggested someone had been camped there recently. Nakai crouched immediately, examining the ground. Evelyn mirrored his movements without thinking. The connection between them had become instinctive, a silent rhythm born from necessity and shared danger. "There," Nakai murmured, pointing to faint footprints leading toward the tree line. "They passed through last night, likely to intercept travelers on the main path." Evelyn studied the tracks. She had learned enough to see what he saw: size, depth, and weight. And for the first time, she felt the thrill of understanding part of his world. "Can we avoid them?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he replied, not looking at her. "But we will need to split paths if necessary. You will follow the creek. I will circle the ridge." She tensed. "Alone?" "You follow instructions. You survive. That is all that matters." The words were sharp, but beneath the hardness was something she couldn't yet place. A quiet, unspoken expectation that she would rise to the challenge. And she realized she wanted to. As he moved to prepare, she watched him, noticing the set of his shoulders, the fine line of muscle in his arms, the way his hair swayed when he bent to adjust his quiver, the way he always seemed ready, always in control. She had come to depend on it, and now, watching him move, she felt a strange stirring, a recognition of strength, of presence that went beyond survival. "Be careful," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Nakai froze mid-motion. He turned slowly, his dark eyes meeting hers. There was no softness, no smile, only the briefest pause that suggested he had registered her words differently than she had intended. "You will do as I say," he said finally. Voice even. "Yes," she whispered. He returned to his preparations. The moment passed, leaving behind a quiet tension, heavy and palpable. Evelyn realized with a jolt that she had felt something shift between them. A recognition of connection, perhaps, or the first spark of something that would take root if they survived this ordeal. When they were ready, they moved out. Nakai led through the higher ground, scanning constantly. Evelyn followed along the creek, the water frozen in sections, snow sliding off branches into her path. Each movement demanded focus, but also fostered a strange intimacy. Their survival depended on trust, and trust was no longer just mechanical. Hours passed with only the wind and crunch of snow beneath their boots. Then, as the sun began its descent, casting long, golden shadows, Evelyn rounded a bend and nearly collided with Nakai. He had emerged from the ridge above her, silent as a shadow, observing the path below. Their eyes met. Something unspoken passed between them. Neither moved closer, neither spoke. Yet the air seemed charged, a subtle acknowledgement that the bond they had forged in shared danger was more than necessity. Without warning, a shadow shifted across the snow. The intruders had caught up. Nakai acted instantly, drawing his bow, eyes sharp, every movement fluid and precise. Evelyn ducked instinctively, drawing her knife. The moment was chaos. Action and instinct converging in a silent dance. By the time the threat passed, leaving behind only broken snow and scattered footprints, they stood side by side, breathing heavily. No words were exchanged. Their eyes met again, this time longer, lingering on the small space between them. Evelyn felt a flush on her cheeks despite the cold. Nakai, for a fraction of a heartbeat, did not look away. The unspoken acknowledgement hovered there. Danger had forced proximity. Silence had forced recognition. And now, the bond between them was undeniable, even if neither admitted it. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the snow-laden forest, Evelyn adjusted her shawl and took a careful step closer. Not for warmth, not for safety, but simply to move within the orbit of his presence. Nakai did not step back. He simply shifted his stance, allowing her the space she had claimed, the smallest concession in a world where concessions were rare and earned. The storm was over, but the tension between them had only begun to burn.
Tell me what kind of story you want next. Your ideas might be the next video. Also hit that subscribe button if you want the stories to never stop. See ya.